This is Jeff Gomez. Jeff, if I was to describe you, tell me about you.
Professionally or personally?
Both. You grew up in Dallas, right?
I grew up in Dallas County in Cedar Hill.
Okay.
German.
Yeah, your mother was German.
Mother was German, father was Costa Rican. Both of them migrated. So I'm the first, actually, to be born in the United States. And so on a professional level, going back to that, I did security in the military.
Yeah.
And
security forces,
which is, as you know, would call it parallel to law enforcement, but there's some similarities.
Yeah.
And ended up retiring out of the Air Force in 2010. So a little convoluted, but I had active duty time, and then there's a mixture of National Guard and Reserve.
Exactly.
And then you go back to my career. I started off a career as a public safety director for shopping centers, and still doing it 27 years later. Working very closely with law enforcement agencies, wherever they may be or whatever.
Absolutely.
Shopping center I'm in. So that's in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, look, when I reached out to you, I told you I'm not just interviewing people who were cops. I'm interviewing, but you were perfect for this because of your life experience. And so the first question I had was, what influenced your perceptions of police officers growing up in the Dallas area?
You know, I thought about that one out of all these questions the most because you and I think, have some similarities that we didn't have social media. You know, media was pushed out not in real time like it is now.
Exactly, yeah.
So, you know, I lived in a very diverse neighborhood as a very young kid and as a teenager. I was a little blessed that I was able to have a mixture. Even my school, I don't think you could put a tabs and say there was one race higher than the other. And if it was small percentages.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, and I didn't get in a lot of trouble as a teen, so I didn't have a lot of law enforcement run-ins. But I was growing up in an era in the late 80s where, or I should say the mid 80s, where, you know this, hip hop and rap was coming out.
Exactly.
And it was hitting the suburban areas, you know, and kids in the suburbs who, you know, didn't really understand what it was like in LA and New York were hearing these stories, if you will, about LA and New York.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it influenced you, but it painted a picture of what law enforcement was like for other people. And then you would kind of see that maybe in your own experience if you're unfortunate enough to see it.
Yeah.
I didn't have, like I said, I had very little run-ins. You know, when I did, I was a teenager, but I was a teenager that was driving a car that I put accessories on it that made it stand out so that when I'm driving around at 12 midnight, even coming home from work, and there's very little activity on the streets, because remember back then, not a lot of things were open that late.
Exactly.
I was a fast food worker, right?
You know what? And I forgot all about that. We didn't have stuff open like we do now.
No. And so, you know, 10 o'clock at night now, in the city that Hurst, Texas, I live in, I bet if you backtrack to 1985, there were very few cars on the road.
Yeah.
And, you know, now 10 o'clock at night, I mean, it doesn't slow down. The mid-cities just doesn't. And in Cedar Hill back then, that's the way it was. Duncanville was. And so I'd been pulled over a couple of times by a certain cop. And, you know, I don't know that he was looking to do anything other than figure out who I was and why I was out that late. And, you know, a young kid being out that late, why are you?
Yeah.
So, you know, I didn't have a negative sort of tone towards law enforcement.
Yeah.
I was kind of middle of the ground. But again, if there was anything that was influencing what I was seeing about law enforcement, it was going to be the what I was hearing on the radio or on vinyl or whatever. And then I get in the military in 1989, and I take this job that's got some law enforcement relations to it, and then the Rodney King thing comes out.
Yeah.
And I was in Hawaii when that happened. And if you've never been to Hawaii or you've never lived in Hawaii, especially on
I think it's beautiful.
It's beautiful, but there is there's a lot of Californians that have migrated from California to Hawaii. Yeah. As well as a lot of Hawaiians that have migrated, and Tongans and Samoans to, you know, California. Yeah. And so there was some tension during that time frame with some of the locals and law enforcement and military. And I'm sitting on that military side when there's some tension. It wasn't bad, but, you know, it impacted a lot of things. But that's also, while that wasn't social media, that was media driven. And the media is pushing this story, you know, and you can't hide from the camera. Well, what does everybody have nowadays? A camera.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's what they have. So stuff is pushed out in real time now. So it's totally different than what it was. I mean, even in my career field, you have to be very cognizant of who's recording and who's not.
Yeah.
That's a real thing.
Yeah.
That's a real thing. So yeah. So that, I hope that answers the question.
No,
so,
I think
and it's probably generation after generation after generation has been groomed that law enforcement's bad.
Yeah.
I didn't think nothing of it. And I'll give you a little brief story, but I remember one time being at one of the centers and I was standing next to a police officer. We're just talking and this mom comes by and she has her kid with her and she points to the cop. She says, "You better be good or he's going to take you to jail." And the cop kind of came back kind of nicely. He said, "Well, that's not what we do."
Yeah.
And the mother seemed a little, concerned
that he said that.
And then I kind of sat back and he said, she's grooming that kid and he's going to groom his kids and that kids. And the barrier just gets thicker and thicker and thicker.
Yeah.
And so that's what, growing up the way I did and then having met you guys, I'd never had that barrier.
Yeah.
And not everybody gets that opportunity.
Let me ask you this. What qualities do you believe are essential for police officers to possess? And because you look at that first on when you've had people that wanted to come on and work with you, and then they tell you, "Hey, I want to be a police officer. That's my eventual goal." You already pretty much know what you think that you would like to see in qualities in police officers.
Well, if you're going to be a police officer, you have to want to be a police officer and understand what they're, what are you looking to get out of this? Because the reward is minimal.
Yeah.
And you're not going to have a bad guy come to you and say, "Look, I was going to rob this guy, but you just happened to be in the right place at the right time." It just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
When I got out of my active duty, I had lunch with a friend of mine that was a police officer, and I was contemplating and possibly going to that field. And I don't know if he stirred me in the wrong direction or the right direction, but he asked me, "Why do you want to be a police officer?" And I stumbled over my question. He looked right in the eyes and said, "You don't want to be a police officer." And he was right. I didn't want to be a police officer. I didn't want that role. I didn't want that responsibility. But I think first and foremost, you got to want it for the minimal of what you're going to get back, because you can't expect to go into it and get a lot back.
Yeah.
Now, I do think, you hear people say, "Well, if I can change just one life," it is very gratifying to get involved and watch someone change. If you can alter their path as a law enforcement officer, you get involved with some of the youth and years later they come and thank you for, whether it be a police athletic league or whatever, basketball camp, and you stir them in the right direction, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
I think patience is a huge thing that law enforcement officers have to possess. Understanding, and background. I mean, if you're a police officer that grew up a hard life and you were in the streets and now you're working the streets as law enforcement, you're probably gonna have a little better understanding if you didn't have that background. So I do think that you got to have a lot of that. And you got to understand the realization of the job. I mean, let's be honest. Divorce amongst law enforcement officers is high.
So true.
And are you ready for that?
Yeah.
Because the odds are against you, and, I heard once that a law enforcement officer sometimes gets put in a situation trying to unravel what the mess that someone took a lifetime to make. And that's a hard position,
It's a good way of putting it.
To respond to a call
that
is taking this guy a lifetime to screw up. And you're responding and expecting to fix it or remedy it. So
interesting,
yeah. So
if you had to think about police practices, are there any police practices that you believe need to change? And if so, why? If you can't think of any, that's fine too. But.
Well, here's the double-edged sword with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a big complaint in the community, or I should say there is a complaint in the community that law enforcement officers look very military.
Okay.
They've been militarized, right?
Yeah.
Now they're wearing the tactical vest and the BDU pants.
Yeah.
And, they're not the old
traditional.
1969 guy walking around with a bobby stick, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, they've changed because the threat against them has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything that I think that they could do differently? Yeah, pay more. Pay more.
I like that.
Because you get what you pay for in any field.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's fine. You can buy me lunch every day of the week, but lunch doesn't equate to my mortgage.
Yeah.
You know, pay them more. Make sure their retirement is good. Make them want to stay.
Yeah.
Rotate them. You know, I do believe that in my heart of hearts that what happened with Rodney King, what has happened in some of these other incidents is the officers become desensitized to the human. You know, I can't imagine what it's like to show up and see some of the things the officer has to see over and over again, especially in a pretty bad community.
Yes.
And then expected to have understanding.
Yeah.
That's not a switch that flips right away, right? So, you know, rotate these guys.
Yeah.
If you know, have programs in place that someone can recognize this guy's
stretched,
man. Maybe he's drinking a little more. He's going through a divorce. Rotate him. Yeah. Rotate him. You got to have personnel. Personnel, you got to have pay. So the bottom line is pay him more. Yeah. You know, like see that different.
Something that attracts them to the profession in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, you know this. You got law enforcement agencies that pay. You could go elsewhere and get paid more to do less.
Absolutely.
You know, and not you. I mean, Bucky's manager makes more than most police officers start out at.
True.
You know, and he's not getting shot at.
Yeah. We talked about the training. Mm-hmm. What impact do you think that social media has on public perception of the police?
Well, social media pushed out a narrative that there was a flat earth and people bought it. Yeah. So because the media is in real time, because it's an angle, you know, any angle can be taken. I mean, it's not the 3D picture. It's somebody's viewpoint. I mean, I saw a story in Dallas, it was a while back, where a car crashed, caught on fire with occupants, and youth were pulling out their cell phones. And law enforcement shows up, gets occupants out, and he kind of loses it on these kids. I mean, these kids were willing to let bodies burn alive because it made better social media content than to try to help somebody, you know? So I am not a big social media fan. Yes. We were talking about this the other day at work. Social media to me, and it's been out a while now. What we're talking about, 2009. So you're talking 16 years at least.
At least.
It has killed a lot of critical thinking in younger people or people that use it a lot.
And that affects even the candidates that we're going to get for police officers.
Yeah. And what, if I'm right, and what I think will happen over the next 30 years is that you're going to see a lot more people jump off social media. Yeah. Because it'll not only be the thing to do, I think people are right now starting to understand the mental effects it's having. You know, in our day, if somebody didn't like me and they spread a rumor about me, that rumor died. Yes. And today it lives forever online.
Exactly. Yeah.
I saw a story. You want to watch a really, really good documentary? It's called The Social Dilemma. I think it might be on Netflix still. It's the head guys that ran these social media companies.
Oh, that's right. They didn't even want their kids.
And they actually went to doctors and psychologists and said, how do we get people hooked? And that was the invention of the like button. And they said there was a rush of dopamine in the system when a kid would look at this like button and get that rush. Yeah. Yeah. So I put a photo up and 10 people like it. And now I need a photo that's going to get 20, 30, 40 people like it. And in reverse aspect, if the photo didn't get as many people, then there was a downer to them, right? Yeah. And so it created a society of individuals that are online, and it's an addiction. You know, it really is an addiction that these kids get on it. And you're right, candidates, I mean, I don't care what you're in, law enforcement as well. Look at some of the things that some of these law enforcement people have posted. Yeah. I mean, you had the Kobe Bryant crash, and law enforcement officers, first responders on the scene, took photos of the bodies and shared it. That was their critical thinking. Yes. That was their critical thinking. It was I do understand I do understand the good points about it. Yeah. You know, if I haven't seen you in a while, I can look online and there you are. Yeah. Yeah. You know, but as kids, if I wanted to come see you, I had to go walk down to your house. People are non-confrontational with social media. And social media, you can be whoever you want to be. Text, you can be whoever you want to be. Yeah. But then when you go up to them and confront them, if they're hidden behind the phone or that profile, it's an awkward scenario and situation. Yeah. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, in our day, you know, you had a beef with someone, you talked it out. You went to them and you said, okay, look, I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't like you, or you don't like me, or whatever.
Yeah.
Now it's hidden behind the phone.
Yeah.
And there's, even in that same documentary, they said in 2009, they did a study, I think it was girls between 9 and 15, there was a increase in them cutting themselves, harming themselves. Well, that's the same year that the cell phone first came out with Facebook installed already on it. You'd have to download an app.
Yeah.
So you think about that. I mean, your children's children, your kids, these kids get cell phones at what, age 8, age 9?
Yeah.
They're not going to know what it's like to be without a cell phone.
True.
Get them Christmas gifts they wouldn't otherwise get. And you hope that it's the gift that keeps on giving. You hope that as they get older, they remember that, and they, it's kind of that pay it forward mentality.
Yeah.
You got to have something. Police Athletic League, they do these basketball camps.
Interesting point. Yeah, excellent point.
There's so many different programs out there.
Yeah.
But I do know, and I've noticed that it's on the officer that wants to drive that. Well, I can't mention his name. You introduced me to him.
Yes.
This dude is a pit bull when it comes to community relations and the amount of, and he's one that got us in the shopping thing at Target, but and teddy bears, handing out teddy bears at the children's hospital. Those things when you're in, because I started off with saying this a while back, people see uniform, they don't see people.
Yeah.
So you got to keep constantly pushing this narrative. Hey, I know you see the uniform, but I'm a person, and eventually let someone see past the uniform.
Okay, let me move to this then. How can police officers demonstrate accountability in their work?
I don't know exactly how you demonstrate accountability, because accountability is kind of self-served. You have to be the person that has integrity, and I've always been taught that integrity is something that is when nobody's looking, what are your actions? So accountability in their work. I mean, I've come across what I would deem as officers that are lazy.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah.
And then I've come across some that are just like our friend,
go-getters.
He's a go-getter. I think, that's up to law enforcement hierarchy to determine, who's out there doing the job and who's just kind of out there.
Yeah.
I think the officers that are out there that are lazy, I think that's what gives departments bad reputations.
Yeah.
Again, I've been in areas of situations where I've come across a law enforcement officer that, might have said something or did something, and I thought, what an ass.
In what ways can police departments learn from corporate security practices?
Ooh, I think it's a combination of both. I think one needs the other. What I've seen over the years is there's more of a connection now than there's ever been.
Yeah.
Those relationships are really important on both sides. Understanding, look, Scotty had to understand how Michael worked.
Yeah.
Michael had to understand how Scotty worked.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
I think it has to.
We're talking Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen.
Yeah, I think you have to have both of those in there. In the technology now is so good on both sides of the fence that the hardest part is connecting it. I think there's corporate programs out there that have technology that's insane, and there's police departments that have technology that's insane. It's just how do you put it together so that it's all in one.
Let me ask you this. What advice would you give to someone considering a career in law enforcement?
Why do you want to do it?
Yeah, because you talked about that earlier.
Yeah, why do you want to do it? I think that the advice, again, not being a law enforcement officer, but I think you better have a very good reason why you want to do it as your foundation, because depending on where you go, it might not be about the pay.
And we're not talking about canned answers. I want to protect and serve, and I don't want any of that.
A good friend of ours one time, I was in a job, and I was my boss had been promoted.
Yeah.
And the people, so I was considering taking that position. Okay?
Yes.
But everybody that was below that position had been there so long, they were making more money than that position. So did it really benefit me to jump into a lead role where I was managing people that made more money?
Yes.
And it influenced them. They definitely weren't going to apply for it because they didn't want to lose their money.
Yeah.
And a good friend of ours told me, he said, take it for the title, not for the money. And so that's what I did. I took it for the title, not for the money. Now, it helped me in my next job when I applied for what I'm doing now to have that role, that position. So, you know, if I told you as a candidate, you can come be a police officer with this department, but I can only pay you this much. Are you willing to do it? Because if the answer is no, then you've told me this is about money.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not about, can I go over here and do this and see if this is what I want to do in life? And if it is, then I can look around and say, I noticed this department over here pays a little more.
Yeah.
I want to go over there. That to me is huge, but you got to really, if you want to be a law enforcement officer, you need to think about it hardcore. I'm of the type that, and it's like this with the military. When I get in it, I'm in it to stay. I'm not in it to do 5 years, 6 years. You know, I said it a couple times in this interview. You got to know it's what you want to do. You got to have your heart in it. You got to have the reality of what it's going to bring into your life, because while there may only be 8 hours or 10 hours, it's a 24-hour sort of processing. You may go to work and see something you don't want to see. And the only equivalent I have of that is I once worked in a hospital, and I was in the ER as a security guy. Mm-hmm. And I would see people. I told a story not too long ago. This ER that I worked in, you had what they call a family room. And I knew if the doctor came to me and said, put that family in the family room, they were about to receive the worst news of their life. They were gonna understand. It was probably gonna be telling you a loved one didn't make it.
Yeah.
And the one that really got me was one night. It's so the ER was divided from the, you know, people could walk through the door over here, and here's the family room and seating, to these doors, and here's the actual ER, and the ambulance pulls up on this side. So one night I saw this ambulance come in with a little girl. She probably was at whatever age it is that you could stand. And I could tell by looking at her that she was not with us anymore. Mm-hmm. And what I found out was her mother was using a pickle bucket as a mop bucket and had water about halfway up. Little girl had pulled herself up, leaned over to look in, and fell in, and it drowned. And I knew when I saw the little girl that she wasn't with us. When I went to the other side of the door, I saw the family, a lot of them, and the hope in their eye. Mm-hmm. But I knew already that there was no hope.
Wow.
And the doctor asked me to put him in the family room. And it was about 30 to 45 minutes before he came out and gave him that news. And I had to live with 45 minutes absorbing, I know something that's going to just change your life for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. It was a hard burden to carry. You know, you start experiencing stuff like that. It doesn't cut off when you punch off the clock. You go home and you live with that.
Yeah.
You know, I told you earlier that law enforcement officers, we know this, have a high divorce rate.
Yes.
You and I both know someone that was going through a divorce and his drinking increased.
Yes.
Significantly, right?
Yes.
So, you know, what advice do I have for you? Are you prepared for that mentally? Are you prepared mentally to go to work and see something that's going to carry over to your life, your family, that you just don't unsee at the end of 8 hours? And
it's going to be with you.
It's going to be with you. You know, and you cope with it differently.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen it, and I'm sure you coped with it in your ways.
Yes.
So that's probably the best advice I could give for you. And if you're willing and you understand what comes with it, then I think, you know, you should do it. You should go for it and try to make that difference in at least one person's life. Because if you know, I was at and again, not going back into what I do per se.
Yes,
I caught a teen. I didn't catch it, but they caught him stealing, and he was 15 at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was in the office, and the law enforcement officer walked. We were in this loss prevention office, and the officer walked out. And I'm sitting with this teen, and I don't know what made me do it, but I started having a conversation with him. And I asked him what he was doing. You know, why are you doing this, man? You know, you seem like a good kid. You come from a good family, and why are you doing this? And we had this conversation, and I told him, I said, you know, the funny part is you're at a fork in the road right now. You know, what you do now can affect the rest of your life, because you keep doing this, it's on your records, you know, jobs, you can't get a good job, or you're gonna have trouble finding a good job. And I don't remember the kid. Fast forward, I was at a restaurant here locally, and this 20-something-year-old guy walks up to me, and he says, "You probably don't remember me." He said, "But I want to thank you." And I thought, who's this guy, you know? Well, it turns out it was this kid. Mm-hmm. And he told me that my speech changed him. He said, you know, I realized right then and there that if I kept down this path, I was not going to go well. And he made a conscious decision to change, and he did. And he was explaining to me how he had a family now, and he owned a motorcycle shop. And he asked me if he could buy me a drink, and I let him buy me a drink. And it was so refreshing when he left to know that, 27 years, even if it's just this one speech changed one person's life, it's something that I can recall and remember and tell you and whoever else the story.
Yeah.
So I think law enforcement officers, I do believe they can impact a lot more than crime. The person that's watching this, what made you want to become a police officer? Was it another police officer?
Yeah.
What is it that, did you see something, but yeah, I think unfortunately, majority of your job is not impacting people's lives in a positive way. Yeah. But if you get that opportunity, obviously you should try,
Yeah.
If you're in it for the money, then,
And it for the wrong reason.
That's right. That's right.
What are your thoughts on police officers participating in community events?
Well, it's outstanding. I mean, it's good. You can never have enough community. And I think a lot of the community wants it. I think some community may not, but that integration, of being able to understand who your customer is. That's why I think a lot of neighborhood patrol officers
absolutely
out there.
Community policing,
trying to figure out who is who, and every community likes to know, or at least think they know, that they could reach out to that one person. Yeah. They want to be able to make a complaint or just say, hey, this is what I've noticed. See something, say something. But community, it starts coming to the community. I don't see anything bad that can happen with having officers either participate, be a part of, have any relations. And, why wouldn't you want it? Yeah. But again, I start off by saying that the DARE program didn't come in until, I was a teenager. Yeah. And I don't know that I even heard of neighborhood patrol officers until later on in life.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
community policing just evolving.
It's evolved. And if I ask you, why is it evolved? What evolved? It's because we found more and more that there was a separation of, police from the community, that you got looked. I told you earlier, you're militarized. You guys are all in this scary tactical gear now. You've got long guns. You've got this, that, and the other. So that barrier started growing. How do you break down that barrier? Well, you hammer it with community. I mean, you got law enforcement officers that go out there to help build houses. On their off time. And so I think if it's true and it's sincere and it's in the heart and it's not for the camera. Yes. I think that's good.
What qualities do you think are vital for police leadership?
That's like any other leadership. Mm-hmm. If I hadn't made the burger, how am I going to tell you how to make it? You see what I'm saying? So I think police leadership has to be somebody that's been in the role and understands it, and has to be acceptance of change. The reality is things have changed, they're still changing, and they're going to change. So if leadership doesn't change with it and understand it, I noticed, for example, I can't think of the years, 7 to 8, maybe 5 law enforcement agencies now are allowing beards and tattoos.
Yes, exactly.
Beards and tattoos.
And when I started recruiting, tattoos were, you had to have them covered up. Whereas now you're seeing police officers where it's exposed.
Well, and now private security.
And we didn't have beards then.
Yeah, private security. That's the Chris Kyle effect. Everybody's SEAL Team 6 now. Yeah. That's the. Don't get me started. I got a guy that was working at an AMC movie theater. I'm like, who's this Chris Kyle tactical dude? You're security at AMC. Yeah. I think that's a perfect example of leadership, understanding that, we've got to change because they're changing. Yes. And, you don't have to bend your policies or bend your rules, but you got to understand them. It's in any management. Even in my management, I think, trying to figure these kids out the older I get, because the older you get, there can be a disconnect as far as your beliefs and their beliefs. Yeah. But sitting down, listening to them, talking to them, I'll tell you, there's some kids out there that are just disillusioned. I was taking a group to a location, and I remember we passed this. We're going down to Houston. Uh-huh. We passed this $200,000 V. Now the kid sitting next to me is probably his mid-20s. The two are probably sort of there. This first kid, that's dope. Can't wait till I get me one of those. And the kid in the back, I'm gonna get me one. Yeah, mine's gonna have it. And I'm thinking, like, what is your plan to get that $200,000 RV?
Exactly.
Because where I'm sitting right now,
yeah, that's not going to happen.
That's a far-fetched dream.
Yeah.
And so I think that trying to understand the younger generation, like you said, tattoos when you were recruiting, I bet you were probably put in a real hard spot. You probably denied some pretty good candidates.
Depending on what the tattoo was.
Yeah. I mean, I've sat down with some and asked them, is it a deal breaker? And I've had a couple of them say it's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
But I think that's starting to change. So, if you're going to be a good leader, especially the older you get, you got to understand what this is. I'm not saying you got to go participate in, Snapchat and all that, but you have to understand that's what they do. And then when you're going to lead them, you've got to try to somehow get with them and make sure that they understand, what the rules are against social media, which can and can't post. I mean, I went to the Kobe Bryant thing. There's probably a million other examples, but I know when, and you and I think we're still in the unit at the time.
Yeah.
I know there was the Raven program, and
that's right. Yeah.
And we had a guy that was on it that was taking pictures of himself on a bird that's supposed to be sort of inconspicuous.
Exactly.
And he's posting it online.
Yeah.
But that's his mindset.
Exactly.
And so police leadership is you have to evolve into modern era in the current state of what these kids and these guys that you're recruiting on board. And I go back to saying too, and I said this before, and I don't know the dollar amount, but you got to pay better.
Yeah.
Because if you don't pay better, I mean, and I don't know what it was like in your time, if it was competitive all around, but
the average pay for a police officer is roughly $70,000.
That's not enough. That's not enough.
Yeah.
I say that because
and I agree with you. It's not
because you'll have a Frisco of the world that says you could pay 70, I can pay 90.
Yes.
So
start now.
So while it shouldn't be about the money, there will be people that'll go, well, I'll go over here.
Yeah.
And so I think there needs to be, I think someone, should look at that, make it more competitive.
True.
But that pool to choose from with these kids, I mean, we've touched on it all through here, be it the psychological exam, the interview, whatever it takes that should be catching some of these little things that should pop up. For me, it was a little easier because if I got the kid that gave me a resume and he was telling me how he was a Taekwondo black belt, I knew right then and there, he has an aggressive sort of demeanor. I want to hear, why do you want this? And if someone said, hey, and I actually had a female, she had a hard life. She lived with a step family and they were both law enforcement. And she told me that she wanted to be law enforcement. And she was a Starbucks barista. And she told me, I'm going to be with you for a year. And then I'm going to take the exam. And man, to the T, she was with me for a year, took the exam. I went to her graduation. It was my first Amazon purchase. I bought her a police go bag.
Oh, wow.
Because I was told that that's what they would, probably need. So I think that, when you have that, I don't know, that kind of mindset, then it's good. You got to be able to recruit the right person.
Yeah.
If you can't recruit the right person,
it's going to be a problem.
It's going to be a problem.
It's a deal breaker.
And ironically, guess what? It's probably going to cost you more money in the end than it would have been had you just paid them.
I say that all the time.
Yeah.
What is your vision for the future of law enforcement? What is your vision, your outlook on that?
If I'm right, I think it's technology.
Okay.
I was privy enough to go to a real-time crime center, and I was told by the person giving us the tour, right now, Patrol supports real-time crime center, but in the future, the real-time crime center will support Patrol. And he was explaining to me, he said, as an example, you get a call and there's 30 or 40 people out in front of the store, and you get a call that one has a gun and a red backpack, and you've got several people with red backpacks. He said, now you're impacting the entire group with a swarm of law enforcement. He said, but with technology, if we're watching on the camera, we could tell that one officer, hey, it's the guy with the red backpack standing near the payphone with the blue hat and the white shoes. And now you impact one person and not the entire community.
Oh, wow.
That harassment level is not deemed necessary. It's minimized.
Yeah.
Another example he gave me, is we use a camera system that picks up on a stolen vehicle. He said, there's a time now where, you'd be driving, run the plates, oh, that's stolen, and this police chase ensues. Now other lives are at risk and in danger. He said, through technology, what we do is now we let that car get parked and then we swoop down on a parked car versus chasing it through the city.
Exactly.
And so I think technology is just going to evolve to the point that, there will be things that'll be able to be done with less impact to the global community. It's scary at the same time, but it's out there. I mean, the amount of technology, whether it be drones or cameras or whatever, they're improving so vastly fast. Even AI, who knows? I mean, it's limitless. But if you look at, how long have you been retired now?
Oh man, 2016. So
you've been retired 9 years?
Yeah.
Look at the technology now and when you retired.
Absolutely.
In just 9 years.
It's advanced. Yeah.
It's advanced. So I think.
And continues to advance.
Yeah. I think that's going to be the future of. I'll tell you this, in private security and law enforcement, if you're one of these gamer kids, I think you stand a really good chance of having a career in some of these aspects.
I think you're right.
You got helicopters right now that are manned.
Yeah.
They've got planes flying without pilots. So you may have helicopters without pilots or drones, in the air. Who knows? But I think that's the future for it.
Okay. All right. Well, Jeff, man, we got to say thank you. This is going to be another golden interview.
And remember, if you can't give, you can't afford those fries.
There you go. All right, Mr. Gomez. Jeff, thank you so much for adding to that bit of the conversation.